So I'm so excited today, guys. I've got Shelly Tygielski with me, all the way from the US. Shelly is the founder who started hashtag Pandemic of Love, an incredible organization. She'll tell you more about it in just a bit. She's also been named a CNN hero. And the Pandemic of Love, up until this point, has now grown into 1,500 plus volunteers, 1.2 million individuals matched, and over $50 million in direct transfers since March when it was of 2020 when it was developed. Now, what's really important, how I found out about Shelly, is that Ariana Huffington described her as the 2020 Connector of the Year. And of course, this series is all about human connection. So we want to talk to the people who really have seen it on ground and how it can help to heal. Shelly, thank you so much for being up late and doing this with me. So can you describe for us here in Asia, who might not be as familiar with Pandemic of Love, the work you've been doing and how the idea, that moment came about where you were like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this?
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because people think that, I just had this kind of epiphany and was just sitting around my kitchen table and just came up with this idea like eureka. But actually mutual aid, which is what Pandemic of Love is, it's a mutual aid organization, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute, is something that I had been working with as a tool in my community in South Florida, which is where I was living at the time. And I was using it on hyper local levels and specifically to help to tend to the needs of our community, right? To help redistribute wealth. And when I say wealth, I don't mean just financially. Wealth can come in many different forms if it's loosely defined, right? A lot of people have time poverty. A lot of people have data poverty. They have other types of needs that other people can help with. So what mutual aid does is it's really derived and built on a premise that every single human being on this planet and in a community has something that they need, regardless of their socioeconomic status, and that every single person has something that they can offer, right? And if we can somehow make those needs and those offerings known, then we could start to create these connections and create this redistribution of wealth that is direct, that is efficient, and that works, because we've now proven that it works, right? And so it's really this kind of nostalgic, I always say, way of thinking about the world, right? I remember my grandfather used to tell me stories about this mystical time period called back in the day. Back in the day, we all knew our neighbors, and if this one lost his job, somebody else would help them financially until they found another job. And if this one lost a parent, the whole community would raise that child. And so there was this sense of a safety net, a true community of care where people could be vulnerable and they could not necessarily even need to ask for help because help was always available, right? It was proactive help. And so I dream of that. And maybe I'm, somebody that should be lobbed in with like a John Lennon type of dreamer, and that's okay. I've been called worse, but I think that that's the world that I see. We're talking about dismantling all of these different systems in the world, especially here in the United States, that don't work.
But you're disrupting even how charities work, actually. I was thinking about that, right?
Yeah, so that's
go through this middleman, and then they take administration fee. It's like, I just want to help the people.
Exactly. Well, that's you've hit the nail on the head. So Forbes actually called us a nonprofit disruptor. They said, like, you're the Uber of nonprofits. And I was like, that's actually exactly what we are, because we are direct. There's no overhead. There's no administrative fee. We don't even have a Pandemic of Love. Yeah, we don't have a Pandemic of Love bank account. We've been offered, people say to us, oh, can we write you a check? And we're like, no, that's not how we work. So the way that it does work is when the pandemic hit in March 14th, so we're almost at a year. Yeah, Sunday will be our 1 year anniversary of Pandemic of Love. I looked to my community and I saw a bunch of fear bubbling up, and I saw a lot of people really nervous about not being able to shelter in home. How could they even pay for enough groceries to do that, keep the lights on? if they weren't working and they're single wage earners, or they work on hourly wages or tips, that's not a good thing, And so they, what basically happened was that I sat down at the table and I thought, okay, I've got to streamline this. I have to use this concept of mutual aid and streamline this operation. And so I created 2 forms, the give help form and the get help form. And what I did was I put it up on the website. Sorry, not on the website. I put it up on my social media on Instagram. And I just created a very short 40-second video. And I just said, if you need help, click here on this link. And if you can give help, click here and we'll match you. And I went to bed thinking that, maybe the next morning there would be a couple dozen people in there. And what happened was really funny because it went viral, which is like such a funny pun during the time of a virus, yeah. Right? But I think what we were able to prove is that like diseases are not the only thing that can go viral, right? Like love and hope and kindness and all these other things can also go viral. So it's incredible. We were able to immediately start matching people the next day and recruit volunteers and really expand Pandemic of Love to 16 countries now all over the world.
It's just so incredible. I watched some of your videos on Instagram of people's needs being filmed. And I love that you talk about that having a lack of is not just pertaining to money. Like the gentleman who was homeless after finished up college and now he has a car. He couldn't even make it to his appointments because he didn't have a car. It's freezing cold outside. I mean, solving problems. How many of us walk through our daily lives and see someone and go, because I study human connection, whenever I see the elderly and I'm about to go to Australia and do quarantine and then visit my mum in her nursing home. And you see the lack of human connection from those elderly people who don't get visitors. And you go, that is a form of poverty too. That's a form of lack, right?
100%.
I know you have loads of stories, and I will give everyone the link afterwards if they need a bit of inspiration right now, to check out Shelly's website to see some of the stories. But from you as the founder, can you give me a couple of your absolute favorite human connection stories in conjunction with Pandemic of Love?
Sure. So one that comes to mind is a story that was particularly inspiring right before the election that happened here in November in the United States. Of course, as the world knows, there's a lot of political divide that's happening, and a lot of stress and tension. And certainly it was very heightened right before the election. And people felt very hopeless that there'd ever be a way to even reconcile, these 2 disparate parties that seem so far apart. And what we've been able to do is because we just connect, again, a person in need with a person that can help them, we don't ask questions like, what's your political party? When we connect them, to make sure that we're like connecting people in the same race or political party affiliation or, culture, et cetera. We just are like, you're a human, let's connect you. And you can find your common humanity and have empathy. And so we connected this woman who is a liberal lefty, self-described hippie from New York City. She's an elderly woman who worked her entire life as a social worker and specifically worked with the LGBTQ population in lower the east side of Manhattan during the AIDS movement, right? And so you can imagine just like the formidable, and especially being a New Yorker, right? Like a very strong personality. Yeah, so she possessed all of that. We matched her very early on with a woman in Alabama, in a small-ish area of Alabama called Mobile, Alabama, which is kind of on the coast. And this woman was a single mother, lived in a trailer park, had 2 children, and was incredibly proud of the fact that her lineage came from the Confederate Army. So like basically, during the Civil War, right? And so we connected them, and we, within a day, got an email from the woman in New York that was so angry in tone. And she was pissed. I wound up calling her, And I said, may I call you? I asked for consent. She said, yes. I called her. I spoke to her for a good 20 minutes and got completely ripped to shreds. And I was told, how dare you match me with somebody that is voting for someone that is hurting me and hurting the people I love. And why would I want to help this person? And so I heard her out. I listened. I took it in. And when she was done and she kind of got it all out, I said, okay, I heard what you're saying. And I understand where you're coming from. And I would absolutely, from a reactionary perspective, feel the same way because I hold your values. However, I want you to look at this as an opportunity, right? You have the choice to react or you have the chance to respond, right? And a reaction is, you feel like you almost don't have a choice because you just kind of fall into this like default mode, right? But if you really kind of sit back and reflect about how you want to respond, I said to her, you can actually prove to this woman who probably has never left the state of Alabama, definitely has never been friends with New York, probably has never visited New York. You can prove to her that a Yankee hippie snowflake is somebody that can be kind and that can be willing to help you and someone that can be friendly with you. And maybe you can break down some of these barriers or walls or perceptions or narratives that she's held, these beliefs that she's held her entire life, because that's how she grew up. You know, she's never been able to have different experiences or walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. And by the same token, I said to her, you probably have never been to Alabama and you've never walked a mile in this woman's shoes. And so she thought about it and she said, I hear what you're saying and I'm going to think about it and I'll let you know. I hadn't heard from her for months. And then suddenly I get an email from her late in the summer. And the email is a beautiful email talking about how since we spoke, she's been transacting with this woman on a weekly basis. She sends her a Walmart e-card so she can get groceries for her kids. She found out that her oldest daughter loves to read. And so she's been sending her books through Amazon.com. And the books are all books about like diversity and about, you know, like travel and all these kind of, she actually said to me, like, this is my Trojan horse. This is my moment to be able to like create new narratives in this young girl's mind, like feed her with, you know, just some information and enrich her life, even if she has never left that state or that city. And so they have become friends and they do talk about politics because, you know, Eileen, who's the woman in New York, likes to go there. And she, you know, challenges Christine very often. And they, I think, you know, kind of change each other's minds about certain things. But it's interesting because one particular point, because I mentioned to you that Eileen worked specifically with the LGBTQ population, when she asked Christine, you know, how do you feel about gay people? Like, should they be able to marry? And Christine was like, oh, I have no problem with gay people. I have gay people in my family. Like, love is love. People should be able to do whatever they want as long as they don't try to do anything with me or whatever. She said that was probably inappropriate, but the idea, the point is that she didn't even realize that that was like a liberal mindset, if you will. Yeah. Right. In our context of society, when really it's just a human mindset. But in this polarized world that we live in, that's what it was. And so it's fascinating to me because this happened right before the election. And I posted this and I said, look, guys, however this thing shakes out, we're going to have to reach across the aisles and we're going to need to, you know, just start having conversations and remember our common humanity, like what makes us human, right?
We still have the same needs, the same blood runs through our veins. I think you also raise a point that I always speak about, like certain commonalities will always connect us when those gaps seem really wide. So these women had a common outlook on the LGBTQ community that they didn't even realize that probably drew them a little bit closer together. I saw an incredible story on your Instagram about an elderly white man who's being helped by an African-American young man, didn't know the race. Could you take us through that story? Is that one of your favorites? I'm not going to force you to tell a favorite, but that was my crying reading it.
Yeah, so the story about Marshall and Jacob. So Marshall's, it's interesting because when I sat with that letter for a really long time, because I at first read it, and as a white person, I read it and I felt very hopeful. But then I, kind of went back and thought about it from a different lens. And I realized that actually I felt very bad for Jacob, and I'll talk you through the story, and you can decide really who's the hero of the story, if you will. But Marshall is a grandfather in North Carolina, and he was very fortunate, he said, to not have lost his job, because he still was able to work during the first, kind of wave of the pandemic. And unfortunately, though, he did get COVID in the month of December. And so he couldn't go to work. He was fine health-wise, but just was quarantined, couldn't go to work for almost a month, and lost wages. And he's already sort of living on fixed income, and unable to really make ends meet without that paycheck that he relies on. And so he turned to us. Somebody, one of his younger daughters said to him, "Dad, why don't you go to Pandemic of Love? They can help you with your rent." So we got his application. Our North Carolina chapter got his application. They were able to connect him to a young doctorate student in San Diego, California, Southern California, who was studying psychology. Thankfully, he was studying psychology, because that was like a good thing. And so they had these lovely conversations, and they talked. And at first, Jacob helped him with like an electric bill, a smaller bill. And then as they became closer and sort of more vulnerable with each other, Marshall confessed to him that he was really worried about paying his rent, and that it was overdue. And so Jacob was able to offer to him that he would be happy to pay for his rent. And Marshall was just so touched that in an effort, to sort of maybe even bring them closer together, he decided to go online and looked up Jacob to see if he could learn a little bit more about his research and his work, and, sort of like for the next conversation, be a little bit more prepared, and when he went on the website for the school, he saw that Jacob was actually African-American. And he said, Marshall said, that he was so taken aback. And again, the reaction versus the response, right? His immediate reaction was, "Oh my God, like, I can't get helped by a Black man. Like, I have too much pride, like, here I am asking for help, which is hard enough. And now I'm going to get help from a Black man, So he stopped and ceased all communication with Jacob. And Jacob was actually really concerned, because there's an elderly man who had COVID. And now he's thinking, "Oh my God, the guy might have like died, or maybe he's in the hospital." He kept trying to reach out. 3 weeks had passed. Suddenly he gets a call from Marshall, and the call is, just basically says to him, I owe you an apology." And Jacob was like, "What do you mean you owe me an apology?" And he said, "I deliberately stopped taking your calls and responding to your text messages because I found out that you were Black. And I feel really ashamed. And I'm telling you this because, I've been grappling with it. I've been sitting with it. It's been weighing on me for days, because in my mind, like, I work in a really diverse population with, some of my grandchildren are mixed race. And I suddenly, like, I'm faced with this reckoning that I am a racist, which is a crazy thing for an old dog like me, as he said, to swallow. And so he, confessed all this to Jacob, and Jacob was really gracious, I have to say, and he could have hung up on him. He could have said, like, "You're a crazy old man." He could have said, "I'm not helping you anymore." But instead, Jacob, listened to him and really took to heart that here's this person that is like sharing this epiphany that he had, this revelation. And he decided that he was going to continue to help him. He paid his rent. And, they still talk and check in on each other. And, again, I read the email. We first got it before I talked to both Jacob and to Marshall to get their consent to share the story. And at first I was really hopeful because I was like, wow, there is hope that people can change, right? That they can, again, walk a mile in somebody's shoes and they can see the error in their ways. But I also then realized, wow, I felt very bad for somebody like Jacob who has to live with these types of things every single day of his life, and how hard that must be to have to be a doctoral student, like a PhD candidate at, a great university, and still be diminished in such a way and thought of differently, sheerly, because of your skin color, which is just, it's a hopeful story for sure, but I think it's also very eye-opening,
I'm so glad that they have come back together. And thank you for sharing those two stories. What has the work with stories like these in Pandemic Love taught you about being human and about fear and love?
I guess, what it taught me about being human is that we're all suffering from the same affliction, which is being human. And we're all the same, we really are all the same. And we all have the same desire for health and for opportunities and possibility. We all want to love and laugh and have experiences in our lives. And, if we have children, we want our children to have a better life than we even have. And I think we seem to forget about that. We focus on the things that divide us. And what I've realized is that, especially here in the US now, since President Joe Biden has been elected, we've been talking about unity. That's been like a buzzword that's, everywhere. Unity, we must unite. And I realized that without human connection, that there is no hope for unity, that there can't be community without, that unity that comes through connection, right? It's like, you can't have one without the other. They're absolutely reliant on each other. And so I think we need to make a more concerted effort to make those connections, even in a time of disconnection like the pandemic. And I think what I learned for sure is that love over fear, when you lean into love, when you ask yourself the main question, right? Every morning, and every time you're upset with somebody, and every time somebody, maybe hurts you or comes from a place that causes you to react, ask yourself, like, how can I come from a place of love? How can I come from a place of love? And I think that if that informs at least my work, then it triumphs fear, and it triumphs, pain and suffering and hate for sure. And it just yields a lot of possibilities and opportunities for a better future.
Speaking of possibilities and opportunities, you have a book coming out very soon, and I'm so excited. Please tell us about it and when we can get it.
The book is called Sit Down to Rise Up: How Radical Self-Care Can Change the World. And it's really a way that it illustrates how we can connect the inner work that we do on ourselves, right? Whether it's self-care, whether it's meditation or therapy or other forms of healing, but how we need to connect the inner work with the way that we show up in the outer world, right? Because I think a lot of us are stuck in this kind of self-help mode. And I think the word self-help actually needs to be retired because it's very individualistic in its notion. And really we need to call it community care, right? Because I think that self-care cannot be individualistic. It has to be communal in order for it to work. It's just a fact. Like, people do better and don't just survive, they thrive when they lean on each other.
So
that's what the book's about.
One of our first guests on this series is Dr. James Cone, who's at University in Virginia, and he actually studies the neuroscience of human connection. And one of the things that he's found is, like, firstly, self is a verb, and secondly, the way the brain computes our idea of self is actually communal. So there is actually no individual self. So it's really echoed in what you've.
Correct.
That's incredible.
Right. Dr. Dan Siegel calls it the MWE. MWE. It's the emergence of it's a combination of the me and the we, right? Into a moi-s, like, kind of thing. So it's really fascinating. He's a great person that you should definitely consider.
I will. I'm going to go and stalk him and find him after this to interview him. So if people want to get more amazing stories of connection and be inspired, so literally, if you're watching this, you're probably maybe feeling a bit jaded right now, you can heal yourself simply. If you're in Asia and you can't be right at Shelly's doorstep, the stories on her website, pandemicoflove.com, are incredible. They've certainly helped me greatly. Shelly, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you online as well if they want to follow you on social?
Sure. So on Instagram, I'm actually Mindful Skater Girl. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And on Facebook, I'm Shelly Meditation, and Shelly spelled Shelly. And on Twitter, I'm just Shelly Tygielski, which is impossible to pronounce, but equally impossible to spell. So the best place to actually get frequent stories, especially because I post on my Instagram stories, would be on Instagram. I try to post multiple times a day on my stories and share kind of uplifting ways to be able to connect and to help people.
Thank you so much.